great to be back. Hello, Brookfield. I'm going to talk a little bit about the question of why. I turned 60 last year, and I find myself asking this question, why? Why do I do things much more than I did the first 60 years of my life? I've been fortunate to just sort of do things without giving them that much thought. Some people have even called me a little impulsive, and I've gotten lucky. I've ended up alive and have done some good things over the course of my life. But I'm going to talk today about what we do and how we do it. But more than my previous talks, I'm going to punctuate it with this question of why. First, let me say that 30 years ago today, I was driving down a road a few hundred miles north of Emmaus in South Lebanon, and I was sent there by Church World Service to work with the Middle East Council of Churches. We were repairing homes of villagers who had to flee their homes, living in South Lebanon, close to the Israeli border. And I'd been working that day in a mainly Muslim village. I stopped at a checkpoint, and if you've ever been in the Middle East, you probably feel the way I do about checkpoints. I hate checkpoints. There are checkpoints in Lebanon that were run by the United Nations, some were run by the Lebanese government, some were run by Christian phalangists, some were run by Muslim phalangists or Muslim militias, some were run by the Syrians. You never knew what to expect at a checkpoint. But these guys stopped me. They had, their classic rifle, the Kalashnikov rifles. They stop the car, they lean into the window, and they say, there's the question, why? Why are you working in that village? They asked me. I said, well, I'm with the Middle East Council of Churches. He said, you should call yourself the Middle East Council of Mosques. You're not helping Christians, you're helping those Muslims. So I had to remind him that, in church we're taught that we're supposed to help anyone in need. And I'm sure that one day when your village needs assistance, the Middle East Council of Churches, and I will be there to help you. Well, he consulted with his friend. They decided to let me pass. But it was a dicey time in Lebanon, and eventually I left. About 2 weeks later, I left for good in May of 1984. But didn't leave the Middle East altogether. Worked with Save the Children for many years, spent about 12 years in the West Bank and Gaza Strip, lived 8 years in Jerusalem, and spent a lot of time in refugee camps. And what I remember most about refugee camps is not so much the squalor, the smell of sewage, or the horrible conditions that people lived in. What I remember most is the amazing hospitality that people showed me. People who had so little, so traumatized, so angry about U.S. foreign policy, they treated me like an honored guest. I mean, it happened all the time, anywhere, during curfews, on the street, in their homes. Once I was even kidnapped in Gaza by an angry gang of Palestinian refugees. But even then, they treated me with hospitality, served me delicious food, and was eventually released. Hospitality trumps politics. Most of the time, most places around the world. It's a lesson I will never forget. Back here in Connecticut, 2005, I started this job with what was then called Interfaith Refugee Ministry. I keep using this word refugee. Let me review for you what makes a refugee different from that large body of immigrants. A refugee is someone who has fled persecution. Fled their home country because they were persecuted or they have a well-founded fear of persecution because of their race, their religion, their nationality, their social group, or even just their political opinion. And there are probably about 18 million refugees in the world today. The biggest and most difficult crisis at the moment is the Syrian refugees. There are 2 million Syrian refugees, including 1 million in my old stomping grounds in Lebanon, adding to the thousands of Palestinian refugees who are already there. And then on top of that, Iraqi refugees. 1 out of 4 people in the country of Lebanon is a refugee. That includes 400,000 children, Syrian children refugees. There are also about 2 million Iraqi refugees in the world. And you know that because you've helped resettle Iraqi refugees. We helped resettle a guy by the name of Ahmed who came with his family about 4 years ago. He was an interpreter for the United States Army in Baghdad. He had to take 3 different taxis to get from his home to the green zone in order not to be followed by the Al-Qaeda insurgents who considered him a traitor and would have killed him. They did finally discover that he was working for the U.S. government. They went to his home. They left a death threat with his family. If you don't stop working for the Americans, we're going to kill all of you. He grabbed his family, packed a couple of bags, jumped into a taxi and fled to Jordan. They came to the United States about 4 years ago. They're doing well now. Farouk, another Iraqi translator for the U.S. government, was not so lucky. Al-Qaeda insurgents went to his home, called him a traitor, and shot him 5 times, left him for dead. He miraculously survived, and now he is in New Haven. Came about 6 months ago with his beautiful family, and they are doing well. Most refugees end up waiting long periods of time, dreaming of going home, maybe integrating into the country they have fled to. A tiny fraction have that possibility of resettlement. And every year, your U.S. government invites about 70,000 refugees to come to the United States. Why? Why do we do this? I travel around the state and I speak at schools and universities and I ask them that question. Why do you think the U.S. government invites refugees to come to this country? And they've got the answers. There are a lot of reasons. Some are a little cynical. They say, because it makes us look good. Well, it is a popular foreign policy. It's our tradition. It's our historic tradition to welcome refugees to this country. Statue of Liberty is the most recognizable symbol, and it stands for this great program of welcoming refugees. It saves lives. Refugees make us strong. They strengthen our economy, and in some cases, we're directly responsible for creating a refugee crisis. But during a recession, why do we have to bring so many, some people ask? The answer, clear, simple, profound answer, and it's your answer, and it's a very American answer. We can do both. We can help our own people, and we can have a strong refugee resettlement program. We have to do both. Of course, we have to have programs that help people born in this country who need assistance, and of course, we have to have a strong refugee resettlement program. For every refugee resettlement agency, in fact, there should be 1,000 nonprofits that help the general public. Last time I looked in Connecticut, there are 4 refugee resettlement agencies, and there are about 4,000 nonprofits that help the general public. Back overseas. So the refugees are interviewed by the U.S. government, given a quick health check. A background check is done by Department of Homeland Security, and then they're invited to come to the United States. But they have to take out loans to cover their airfare. And you ask, why? I mean, this is a family that's been living 15 years in Kenya. They fled Mogadishu. They've been barely able to survive in a refugee camp. You're going to charge them for their airfare to come to the United States? Why do we do this? It sends a message from the very beginning of the process that this is not a wealthy program. You are not going to have an easy time. We're not going to lavish a lot of assistance. You have got to take out a loan to cover your airfare. So the State Department runs the program overseas. They make the selection, and then you're assigned to a nonprofit organization like IRIS. Why? Why doesn't the government just run this program? Why nonprofits? It's your fault. Faith-based groups back in the early 80s went to Washington, D.C., and you said to the U.S. government, there should be a strong, vibrant refugee resettlement program, and we can do it on the cheap. Sprinkle a little bit of federal funding and let faith-based groups do the rest. We'll make magic. And in fact, you do. We'll provide the housing. There it is. We'll provide the volunteers. You guys have produced incredible volunteers. We'll provide some private funding to make ends meet in an expensive state like Connecticut, and we will produce the finest, most efficient public-private partnership you have ever seen. And that's what refugee resettlement is. We usually have a couple of weeks' notice before a refugee family arrives. I get an email that says, in 2 weeks, family of 6 from Baghdad is coming. I've got to find an apartment. Or if I'm lucky enough, I've got a church that has an apartment. Find an apartment, furnish it with donated furniture, stock the kitchen with food, and then find someone in the neighborhood who can cook a culturally appropriate hot meal. That's a federal government requirement. You ever want to feel proud of our federal government? Think of that requirement. Within 2 hours of a refugee's arrival, they must be served a culturally appropriate hot meal. Why? Radical hospitality, a warm welcome to ease the transition. We meet them at the airport, at the train station. Always seems to be late at night. Always seems to be really cold. They can't believe it's so cold. They can't understand what all this snow is about. But we meet them, bundle them up, take them to their apartment. They have a great night's sleep after they've eaten the culturally appropriate hot meal. Then we bring them to the office the next day. We sit them down, and our case manager says, okay, we're going to help enroll your kids in school. We're going to help you learn English. Most refugees come, they don't speak any English at all. We're going to connect you to health care. We're going to help you find a job. And we're going to do all this really quickly because we don't have that much money. The government gives us very little. This is a tough self-help, pull yourself up by your bootstraps style program. It's a struggle for refugees. It's not easy starting a new life in a new country with very little money. The lucky ones have IRIS, and the ultra-lucky ones have a congregation like this one to help them. But before you know it, they're learning English, they're working in jobs, hotel housekeeping, landscaping, maybe small factories. They become U.S. citizens, and you're proud to have them as neighbors. Now, the tough why question. Why do I do this? I've been doing this for 9 years. Before that, I worked overseas most of my career. Why? My friends often ask me when I get together for high school reunions, why are you working with refugees? So I sometimes say, half joking, they're so much more polite and respectful than the average American. And recently, I got some new insight into why I do this. You might have seen it. There was a social science study done. It was reported in the New York Times last Sunday. The impact that talking to a stranger has on you. They did some research. They forced people to speak to strangers on a subway. You know, some people spoke to strangers, some people didn't. They interviewed them at the end of their commute, and they found that those who had talked to strangers had a much more pleasant commute than those who had not. So extrapolate that to welcoming the stranger. I mean, it's why I'm so happy at the office. I might feel miserable. I get to the office, I see people from all over the world, I start to smile. It has this incredible positive impact on me. That's one reason why I do it. But more seriously, why do I do this? Well, partly to right wrongs, to achieve some degree of justice for people who have suffered so much. I do this because of what I see in the eyes of people who've arrived at those late-night airport and train station arrivals. That combination in the eyes of refugees, that combination of fear and excitement. The parents are so excited, their children might be, asleep or crying, but they're about to embark on a new life in a new country. I answer the question why I do this every time a proud father will give me a hug and announce that he's recently got a job and he's able to pay the rent. Or a single woman from Afghanistan or Iraq who has never before worked outside the home, and she tells me she's got a job. A fifth grader who came to this country, didn't speak a word of English, and she holds up her achievement award. Why do I do this? I get the answer every time I talk to a refugee and they tell me their horrible experiences of persecution that forced them to flee not just their homes, but their home country. I know that it's not going to be easy for them here. It's going to be a struggle. But they won't have to dodge sniper bullets. They won't have to brave roadside bombs. They don't have to worry about their kids being kidnapped or tortured. IRIS welcomes about 220 refugees every year with your help. You come to our office, you'll see that it feels like a kind of bustling, low-budget United Nations. It's an amazing meeting place of people from all over the world, the Congo, Cuba, Colombia, Afghanistan, Sudan, Eritrea, Iraq, and generous people from Connecticut. And you have been part of this incredible program. You don't have to be a certified teacher to tutor a refugee child. You don't have to be Bill Gates to make a significant financial contribution to refugee resettlement. You don't have to be a human resources specialist to help somebody find a job. Anyone can help. And if you do, like me, you'll probably love it. Some would say that welcoming refugees is our finest American tradition. I do. It's as American as apple pie and baseball. Some would say that welcoming refugees is also so Christian. The fact is, it is a fundamental principle in just about every faith. Welcoming refugees makes us feel not only happy, as the social science research says, it also makes us feel human. That universal cross-cultural imperative of radical hospitality. Wouldn't it be great if radical hospitality, welcoming the stranger, could be encouraged and practiced all over the state, all over the country, all over the world, if it became a kind of principle in our politics, a foundation for foreign policy. And then maybe there wouldn't be so many refugees in the first place. Thank you very much. You all have been terrific. And maybe we'll do another family. Right.